As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a distinguished returning guest tonight, David Morgan, founder of the Morgan Report and renowned guru on the gold and silver markets, is here with us again on Reluctant Preppers. David, thank you for joining us again.
Well, it's my pleasure to be back. Thank you.
We have a very special opportunity tonight, and by the time our viewers are going to be hearing this interview, we will already be past the U.S. presidential election. But this is the eve of the presidential election happening right now, and I got a recent alert from Mike Maloney of goldsilver.com talking about his analysis of the commercial traders and the commitment of traders report, showing near record short contract positions taken by commercial traders against gold, and potentially signifying an increased probability of a downside move in the near term on gold. And you've talked about this, that even on the in the event of a bull market, you can have corrections on your way up, just like you can have some run-ups on your way down in a bear market. But it got me really thinking today about gold as an indicator of uncertainty, and also we've been talked a lot about on this channel from experts talking about the gold markets being manipulated by the powers that be, as a way of influencing public opinion, public confidence in the money supply, public confidence in the banks, public confidence in the stability of the government and the power structure. And it really got me thinking, as the U.S. presidential election we've been seeing a run-up of gold towards the election, and it spiked on a recent FBI reopening of the investigation against Hillary Clinton for allegedly mishandling classified emails, but then dropped back down sharply when there was a re-announcement of no finding by James Comey. And in other words, more uncertainty, gold goes up; reduce uncertainty, gold goes down. But it got me thinking more about how Clinton has been on record as being supported by the major banks, and certainly endorsed by a lot of the major banking establishment and the establishment power structure that's been influencing a lot of the markets. So if there's this near record gold short position on election day, one way of reading that could be that it signals that the banks and the commercial traders are predicting, for example, a Clinton presidency, and they're taking advantage of a tipping point of this shift to reduced uncertainty following the election to push down gold on a near term, even during this bull market. So if that's a realistic probability, then what are some responsible avenues that are available to people who want to protect their wealth in general, or specifically people who may have been wanting to start owning gold or already do own some precious metals and want to protect their wealth? And a couple thoughts occurred to me. One is always the advice about holding your gold and silver and accumulating more on dips. And the other is about buying protective, put options, such as against the GLD tracking stock, to hedge against near-term drops in price. But just if you could weigh in on, number one, do you agree with Mike Maloney that there's an increased potential of a near-term downward pressure in the very near term on gold and silver? And if that's the case, what are ways that people can protect themselves against loss of value?
Okay, well, first of all, I'll just reiterate what I've said. It's not even my words, really, and I give credit to who initially said it, but the function of a bull market is to shake as many people off its back as possible during the, climb upward, be it in a stock situation, commodity, real estate, or whatever the bull market is that we're talking about. So in this case, of course, we're talking about the precious metals. So the bull market has reinstated itself this year, 2016, and it's had quite a run up until the last several weeks, where we got about $100 sell-off in gold and about a $2 drop in silver. And we kind of waffled around, hit the 1750 level in silver, 1250, I believe, in gold. And we've worked our way up. And it's pretty volatile at this point. So commitment of traders. First of all, I want to back up and say that for all the members of the Morgan Report, I pretty much called the, what you're suggesting here, that you hedge or take partial profits or take partial profits and hedge or expect a downturn and all that stuff. And I did that early and I did it in the strength. I think part of it has to do with my, first of all, my age, my experience in the marketplace, and my ability, having done it wrong more than once by selling early and into the strength. In other words, I call the top before the absolute top and the absolute point in time, which is what you want to do, especially in a commodity-based type of a investment or speculation or trade, because, and it applies as well to the stock market, but not quite as importantly, because the futures markets are highly leveraged, which means you get more volatility and bigger moves because of the leverage. So anyway, long way of saying that our members were well tuned into the fact that we were going to get a correction, and a lot of them did follow what we put out for our membership, which is to take some profits, partial profits. So now we saw, and that was based primarily on the Commitment of Traders report, and it took a while. So I don't think Mike has quite the experience level that I have with the COT, which doesn't make me better. In fact, it's just, I think that's a fact that could agree with me. Mike and I are pretty close and have been for a very long time. Usually the Commitment of Traders is certainly a good way to forecast the top and the bottom of the market. It's not a very good timing tool, although it can be suggestive of getting near a top or getting near a bottom. So having just experienced a very huge open interest and me warning my members earlier than maybe some of them would have liked me to, in other words, the market stayed, high probably longer than perhaps they expected, but we're still in the profit zone, still at a high, still worth taking a partial profit at. So I think that yes, that's high enough to certainly consider that we could go a little higher with open interest. There could be bigger short positions than are already established, and at some point there probably will be a sell-off. Usually they're orchestrated. But as far as is it imminent, I'd say probably not, although these are tough to call because, the dynamics of the election and the markets themselves. I mean, if you get a big sell-off in a stock market, for example, it usually takes everything down with it, including gold stocks, at least at the offset, if it's a large enough move down. Having said all that, my suggestion would be what you used the word, I think, once, and that's accumulate. So let me just be a little more specific and a little more focused. Number one, that I do not really care. I mean, I care about the principles that this country was founded on. I care about the rule of law. I care about a lot about principle. I don't care too much about who's sitting at the helm, because I think that it goes well beyond middle management level. But that's my personal view, and I wrote about in this month's Morgan Report, which, as you know, I just sent you a copy. We can get there later in this interview. Right now, I would say accumulating precious metals during the next 4 years is imperative, regardless of who's, again, president of the United States, because whomever is there is going to have some power, obviously, but not enough to really turn the ship around, in my very studied view, which means that people will have to focus more upon their own innate abilities and self-sufficiency and thinking through things critically on their own or with their own families or with their own, let's say, self-organizing collectives or their own groups or communities, much more importantly than what a national government may be enacting or suggesting or implementing or mandating, which means it's back to the original intent or original principle, which is basically self-governing, which means that there's a limited form of government. Now, I know government's growing to an extreme. I'm not I'm not saying it hasn't. What I'm saying is that within that context, it's breaking down, which means if you think that the cavalry is going to save you or some certain political party is going to come to the rescue and things are going to get better and you're going to have more of what you want or more things going your way or a shift in consciousness, forget it. That's an absolute, complete, and total childish viewpoint from, again, my very introspective and steady viewpoint. Because the reality of the matter is that you're basically on your own, and you will be finding that out more and more as the system breaks down, which neither party can control, which means pensions that will not be there when they're expected to be there. The Social Security system will certainly pay out, at least for a very, reasonably long time, but the amount that we will be given will not be having the ability to, make ends meet. In other words, at some point, a total check in the Social Security system may barely pay the light bill, if that. The ability of your life insurance to be cashed in at will might not take place. Money market funds, things get really rocky, may not be cashed out a dollar for a dollar, may not even be able to liquidate a money market fund that's already at law. The potential for bail-in is more likely than it's ever been in the past. So all the things in reality economically are there regardless, again, of who is there and their intentions. They might have great intentions. They may be just mouthing the ideas. It's hard to say. Show me, don't tell me is my attitude. I hear a lot, but I see little. So I probably belabored that enough, but let me just go on just a moment longer, which means if you don't own any precious metals and you are concerned with your future because you agree partially or fully with what I said about you being more responsible for your own lifestyle, your own situation, then precious metals would be probably the second, third, fourth, or fifth thing you should do. I mean, the first thing should be, have some ready cash, regardless of a fiat system, and you should have, backup, water, food, perhaps power, depending on, where you live, heat or whatever. It depends, again, where you live. If you live in an area like me where it gets extremely cold in the winter, then you certainly will want an alternative heat source. So basically, you want your basic survival prepping type of things prior to buying any kind of precious metal as perhaps a barter situation. I want to give some credit to Jim Sinclair that wrote an article today, I believe, on JS Mindset. So obviously today is election day, the 8th of November. I believe it was posted today. He talks about silver's importance, but he also talks about what I just mentioned being more important. Your food supply, that kind of thing. And of course, this sounds very, very, very extreme, and but it isn't very extreme. I mean, having a no-lose bet is something I think is something you don't have to think about. No-brainer is the meme. It's a no-brainer to have extra food. It could be because of a hurricane. It could be because of a flood. It could be because of a fire. It could be because you ran out of work or your wife got laid off or you had an unexpected expense on an automobile or something like that. If you got, 2 weeks, a month supply of food, 90 days, whatever, that's a nice little situation. I mean, you can't go broke, you can go broke, but if you got a lot of, fair amount of food stored, it's a big de-stressor. It's a situation. So, it's a no-lose bet. I recommend it. It depends on you individually how much you think is prudent. I would suggest probably a month for the average family. I think that's, 4 weeks. A lot can happen, especially in the times we're living in a 4-week time frame. If you're very concerned or more concerned than that, then take appropriate action. So coming full circle, once you've established the very, very basics, then you can look at the precious metals as a financial protection. But even there, money alone, or real money, precious metals, is not going to save you. It's going to probably protect you. or protect you to a much greater extent than people that are in the paper paradigm totally, that lose their pension, that get Social Security checks that don't buy very much, that have a life insurance policy that they can't cash out, that have an annuity or something that perhaps isn't inflation adjusted or whatever. So it's a time to revalue your values and to see what's valuable in your life. And so I've probably gone a bit too long on that, but I really think it's important for people to understand, or at least think about and think critically, that, you know, whomever makes it to the White House, if you think that this external person is going to save you or make your life better, you're watching too much TV.
Well, that brings us into the topic that you did mention in your most recent Morgan report, which talks about the relationship, kind of the history of what is the proper role of government and the proper role of the state versus the proper responsibility of the individual, and how distorted that has become, and it's distorted in one direction, and that's with the benefits and the power flowing up to the elite. And you introduced the term in there, the deep state, and it triggered a thought in my mind, because I had just came back last month from attending the Ron Paul Institute Peace and Prosperity Conference in Washington, D.C., and a fellow by the name, we had about 10 different speakers there. One of them was Philip Giraldi, who is a former CIA case officer, an Army intelligence officer who spent 20 years overseas in Europe and the Middle East working terrorism cases. And his topic that he spoke on at this conference, the Ron Paul Institute conference, was the American deep state, where he talked about that the reality of how our government and how our country functions is in fact not talked about, is not evident to the average citizen, and that we are essentially distracted with what's on stage so that we don't probe into what's backstage. And you dealt with similar themes in your recent Morgan report.
Well, I did, and I don't say this often in interviews because it can cause a plethora of questions, but in my previous life, I say that almost not as a metaphor. I had a very high security clearance, SBI, Special Background Investigation. And you can take that wherever you wish to take it. Just let me allude to the fact that I at one time worked within what could be considered the deep state. So I certainly am not talking out of a theoretical perspective. And I'll leave it at that for now. What I wrote about in this current issue of the Morgan Report that was just issued a couple of days ago is the purpose of the deep state is to actually govern the United States to benefit those at the top. In other words, the elite. The illusion of choice is one of their best methods of convincing those without the ability to really think critically that something like a deep state must be a conspiracy theory. The agenda of the elite is to gradually take not only the U.S., but basically the entire world and mold the kind of world where social justice reigns, which means a huge and equally poor global population ruled by a very few. Since the progress is gradual, very few people wake up or even question that a once free people are giving up to government their God-given rights. Some think that changes are progress. Some think that they're not that bad. And still few can see where this all ends. And then I go on to talk about one of my mentors, Harry Brown. And then I also talked about the Republic was founded on individual freedom, yet everyone refers to the U.S. form of government as a democracy, which is basically mobocracy, which is mob rule or majority rule. Only a few are truly aware that the deep state exists and the idea of choice is an illusion. So that's where I'm at. I go on from there and talk about the financial imbalances in the physical economy and the arrogance of those at the top. One more paragraph I think is important here. So here in the United States, and the Morgan Report actually just came back from Germany, as you may or may not know, and the Morgan Report is translated into German and has been for years. And what's interesting is the subscriber base in Germany basically never fluctuated. I mean, the people that bought it in Germany still buy it. I had about a 70% loss over the 4 or 5 years that silver went from 50 all the way down into the 14.
Sure.
And that's okay. I mean, I'm free market. If you don't want it, don't buy it. I understand that. But what's interesting is that the Germans just kept, plowing on because for whatever reasons, I won't analyze it too far. I just find it interesting that one country more than any other in Europe that experienced the hyperinflation during the Weimar Republic are steadfast in their convictions surrounding the precious metals. Anyway, last paragraph I'll read for now is here in the U.S. there are drones, traffic cameras, license plate cameras, school DNA tests, website tracking, and other invasions of privacy. And that's just kind of a warm-up to what I was involved in very, very early, as I say, in my former life, which was ELENT and COMENT, which was ELENT is electronics intelligence and COMENT is communications intelligence. And I knew way back, in the 80s, it's going back a ways, isn't it?
Sure is.
That, when I was asking some of the vendors about kind of what we're doing, I could say this in a very general way and not break any oath that I took upon departure, that they were using PROMs, PROMs, programmed read-only memories. And it occurred to me in a flash sitting there on the flight line one day, in fact, this day I'm referring to, that the ability for the entities to survey the communications and electronic war games that take place was only limited to the amount of memory that was available. And I had this idea right then and there. It's certainly not unique to me. I'm not trying to make this about me at all. I'm trying to make it about this interview. But it occurred to me that once the memory problem was solved, meaning that memory didn't cost so much, you can put in whatever you want for I'll leave that to the listener, would not only look at the communications and electronic situations on a global basis. So when Snowden came out and said what he said, it was not news to me because I'd seen, in the late, 70s, what the capabilities were firsthand, and also once that the memory issue was resolved to the point where we are now, where, this iPhone is greater than the whole computer science building that I used to, have to do my homework in. And that's the whole point. So maybe we can project from there, where we're going in this surveillance state globally. There's, I go on this report a little bit about pointing out as a way to escape it or not, and the answer is basically not. I mean, you can probably circumvent and, be a little bit more private, but it's pretty hard in today's world to get yourself in a position, unless you, are Amish or something like that, to be anonymous in today's world. It's almost impossible to do that.
Yeah, we've interviewed the head of the Privacy Journal, the oldest privacy journal in the U.S., and he's talking about a lot of the things that you used to be able to do to try to protect your privacy. A lot of those no longer are realistic anymore, but it's still necessary for people to understand where they have options and choices and what they can do that would help to protect some of their privacy. But it is getting increasingly difficult. So if we could bring it back home to the individual household and the individual homeowner, as we always do, David, on this channel, and your words of wisdom to somebody who wants to do what they can to reduce risk to their family, given these powers that be that are increasing, and that in some ways you're pointing out that no matter who gets elected president today, that they don't represent really the top of the food chain in terms of who's really directing, calling the shots. So looking to that alone as a panacea or a cure-all to this erosion of our liberty and our constitutional rights, et cetera, is probably not realistic. So if people agree that and they are soberly looking at that, and what can they still do to reclaim? Because you do sound a note of hope in your Morgan report. You do say that, surprisingly, you are expecting that there will be a tipping point reached in the future where there will be an increase of freedom. So how do you see that happening?
Yeah. Well, I see, because of my experience, that tops are very difficult to call, but I've been pretty good at in the silver market anyway. And the tops in a socioeconomic system, probably harder. But I know what topping looks like. Call an exact top, I'd be foolish to try to do that. But I know that the system has been topping for a while. I know that from the movie, the Four Horsemen film.org. You can go there and watch that movie for free, or you can go to my website and get on our free email list. That movie and another one is in that document that you get for free. But the end of the age of empire is taking place, and it's crumbling. I referenced the Brexit vote, and many other nations have people in the street protesting the elite's plans. A defeat of Clinton, who is obviously a candidate of choice for the banking class, it's my perspective, you don't have to agree, could help to restore some fundamental principles, but time will tell. It's my stated opinion that there is a shift coming, and it will be toward more freedom, not less, believe it or not. And that's how I ended it. And I'll continue because of your question. As everything has a limit, even the growth of government has a limit. And we're reaching that limit. You see it right now with the FBI, because you have the police from New York City basically saying, if you don't do it, we will. One of the things of an overextended government is to get the government infighting. And that's what you see all the time. You know, the CIA doesn't like the FBI doesn't like the CIA. I'm just saying this as a metaphor. You can, it's the idea that's important. I'm not saying they literally do, although I think it's actually true.
Well, between the FBI and the Justice Department, at least right now, yeah.
Yeah, you got the Justice Department, that's stopping the FBI. I mean, right. I mean, you can chime in anytime you want. So it's very convoluted. It doesn't work. It's too big, and it's failing. And because it's failing, I can forecast that it will continue to fail. And as things get harder economically, and there's more infighting, and there's more turf protection, and more protect my empire within the empire, so to speak, you're going to see things crumble more and more, as a metaphor. So that means that the individual actually will start to have more and more freedom. It may not appear that way, but that's the reality, because as this whole system starts to break down from basically being overburdened and overweighted and too much of it, the universe has a way to restore balance. And we're way out of balance in many, many areas. And this is just one that may be sort of like a preview of the how much we as Americans have overdone everything. I mean, we've overdone the food thing. I mean, it's a supersize me type of thing. We've overdone entertainment. I mean, people can watch TV for hours upon hours, and there's like 57 channels or 157 channels or whatever. I mean, everything in America seems to be overly done, too much. It's just, too much food, too much entertainment, too little critical thinking, too much reliance on others to do it for you, or sort of the victim mentality where, it's never your fault. It's that you didn't have the right doctor or the right healthcare plan, or you didn't have the right whatever. Very little self-responsibility, which is, of course, what made this country what it was. It was basically self-governing, but that was based on moral principles. And the fundamental presupposition or founding ideal was that the population at large was fundamentally so principled, high moral, super ethical, that the ability to form a republic and make it last was based on that ideal. And without it, it probably would fail. And of course, as I've made mention of probably as much or more than Robert Prechter, who also does work in this area, that there's a direct correlation between the depreciation of a currency by going to a system of lies and the moral degradation of the society at large. They go hand in hand. Honest money, honest people, dishonest money, dishonest people. It's that simple. And we've seen that happen again and again. It's nothing new under the sun. What's happening now has happened before. But the problem is, in my situation, is seeing it from a global perspective this time, whereas the Roman Empire you could consider to be global at that time, and it might have been fairly close. But this time, the distortions are even greater, and the population is several fold larger, and the distortions could get very, very extreme at certain points. So as this election cycle finishes off, hopefully there will not be any violence. I don't know. It's possible. I certainly don't rule it out. I pray that there won't be any. But what we need to do, coming back to the individual, is one, be steadfast in your moral structure. I mean, people that listen to this, probably are better self-educated and better critical thinkers than the majority. To look at not only what you can do to protect yourself and your family, but what could you do outside of that to help the next door neighbor or the community, small one. What is it that you can do to self-improve that is of value in a system that has started to break down further? I mean, a skill set of knowing how to, trade stocks like me is not a really valuable skill if there's an electrical power problem for, a week or two. Those kind of thoughts. And I think the number one that I don't talk to enough is probably attitude, having an attitude of gratitude that we have had so much for so long, really too much for too long, in my estimation, as I was referring to earlier. The ability in the United States to overeat or over-entertain or overdo things has been that way for a long time. And it comes from being, I don't want to say too prosperous, but perhaps not guided by that, my favorite buzzword these days, balance, balancing, nutritious food in the right amount and the correct amount of exercise, balance with entertainment, and the correct amount of perhaps watching documentaries or TV. I don't have anything against it. I'm free market. If you want to, watch TV for the rest of your life and eat, nothing but bonbons, be my guest. I don't think it's a very worthwhile life, but I have not the right to impinge on what you think is right for you. Go ahead. My point is that if you strive to be the best you can be, you wouldn't be at that kind of an extreme. You would be more balanced. And I think that's something that we don't see in our leadership. I think it's something that we don't see in the educational system. I think it's certainly something that we've lost our moral compass about. And I think that it's something that we really need to get back to.
At this point, I should plug the book Return to Order by John Horvath, because he talks exactly about what you're talking about this frenetic intemperance that the materialist society has adopted, runaway capitalism, rather than a focus on moral values that really lead to true integrity, true happiness, that sort of thing. If I could circle us back one last time before we let you go on a point that you brushed up against several times. It struck me in a new way, the way you were talking about it, when you talked about us, how all of this secrecy, the deep state, all that sort of thing, the powers that be behind the curtain, have been so hidden for so long. And anyone who dared think or talk about it was considered a conspiracy theorist and somebody who was lost off their rocker or whatever. But in the recent years, as the overreach has accelerated and has extended, has been overdone, you start to see it becomes exposed. You start to see the truth behind the lie. People saw that in the Democratic National Convention stealing the nomination from Bernie Sanders for Hillary, for example. They almost saw that in the Republican Convention, almost forcing out Donald Trump from getting the nomination. People are seeing that in overreach by whether it's Clinton with her deciding that she'll take the government into her own possession. And you're supposed to have the constitutional branches of government, legislative and executive and judicial, but she's going to establish a umbrella over all of that and take the server into her own home, and now I own the government kind of overreach. And then with Obama with his not unconstitutional executive orders that basically are completely circumventing balance of powers between the government. So we start to see, and then when you mentioned financially the huge house of cards, the trillions upon trillions have been leveraged on the derivative exposure that nobody could possibly pay back. You mentioned that in your Morgan report as well. One of the quote unquote benefits of the ridiculous extremes that have been reached is that people start to see that it is ridiculous, and it's an opportunity. This is what I was getting to: is this what you're talking about? This is an opportunity. As bad as it is, that's actually can be looked at as a good thing, because it's a chance for people to wake up and to make conscious choices instead of being unconsciously just like sheep following along, playing their role. Is that part of what you're getting at here? Is that this is an opportunity? This is a wake-up call. When you see that overreach, you see that the whole culture, the whole government, the whole society, the whole finances, all topping, is a time to wake up and get prepared to take charge of your own life.
Absolutely. I commend you on your summary. It was better than I probably could have done by far, and I thank you for that. Yes, it is. And coming back to what you were speaking about, seeing the conspiracy, it's a metaphor. It's from John Leffler. I'll give credit to John. And what he said makes sense in the context we're talking about. He says when it gets to the end of the end, in other words, as the NWO, New World Order, or the elites, or however you want to refer to them, Illuminati, some people talk about, I don't really care. The idea is from John, and he says, when they get very near the finish line, they will have to take off their costumes and run as fast as they can stark naked, which is a metaphor for seeing who they really are, for what they really are, and what they really want to accomplish. And not to pick on Hillary, but you can see that her blatant ability to stand there and say, the public doesn't understand. I never sent any classified information on my email. This is an absolute, total, complete, bald-faced lie. Yet she has no compunction to any kind of remorse. It's rather a sociopathic, non-ability to have a conscience whatsoever. The exact opposite of what I talked about earlier, where the moral structure of the society at large was so intact, so complete, that republic would work. And now we're in a situation that's almost the exact opposite of that, which comes back, and I'll reiterate what you said, try to add emphasis to it, although he did an excellent job. But really, folks, look, the idea about being an adult, and I don't think there are many in our society, or at least I feel I don't meet many, is the ability to, one, recognize that the cavalry isn't coming to the rescue, that freedom has responsibility, that freedom is constant vigilance, that you need to take your own personal responsibility, and all you really have to do is do everything you say you're going to do, which is the basics of all contract law. And it used to be in my dad's era that if you said you're going to do something and shook hands on it, that was as good as a contract witnessed by 3 lawyers. You lived your word, in other words. And secondly is that you didn't infringe upon the rights of anybody else. So if someone does something that you found offensive, let's say, behind, in their own private home, behind their own private doors, it really was none of your damn business, and that was kind of the attitude. If it wasn't hurting you, it wasn't your business, then so what, really? And this has been convoluted into, thousands upon thousands of laws and edicts, mandates, codes, executive orders, etc. You cannot mandate honesty. You cannot mandate respect for others. You can try, you can put it in the law books, you can have all this stuff set up, but then it gets so convoluted as Bastiat said so long ago in the book, The Law, they get twisted, turned, and usurped by the power elite into making them into justifications for them to live outside of the natural order. So it's time to come back home, and it's not going to be a matter of choice, I don't believe. It's going to be forced or thrust upon us, and you're going to find out sooner or later, and it's probably more sooner than you might think, that you're responsible for yourself, your own actions, your own thinking, and your own wherewithal. And to think that something external is going to take care of you is, again, a childish attitude. So it's time for us to come back to the real values. And those real values actually start within. And it comes from not just the individual. I'm for the individual. That's what the rule of law is all about. However, to survive and thrive, it's based on a community. But a different context than it takes a village. It's more of a context of that high moral structure and those two laws I just outlined. Do everything you say you're going to do, and don't infringe upon the God-given rights of anyone else.
Well, David Morgan, founder of themorganreport.com, we're always grateful to have you here with us on Reluctant Preppers. Thank you for joining us on this election eve, and we'd love to have you back again as we see how this drama plays out. But we heed your warning that not only we see a near-term topping in precious metals, but more significantly, perhaps we see a topping in our society, in our government, in the power structures, and to understand that what we are being allowed to see is not the real top-level management. And in the end, each individual is going to be necessary to take care of themselves and their families, so get prepared now. Just really appreciate always you're joining us here. Thanks again for being here on Reluctant Preppers.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.